Whenever a player gets praised for their eccentric pick or their niche pick, it's often overlooked in how much work it actually takes in order to make that niche pick viable. Now, as we know, League of Legends itself, the game revolves around patches from Riot. And as patches come out, which it's to be determined, and whether these champions they get buffed because of their skins that are soon to be coming out or not, who knows? But smart strategy from Riot if that is the case. Not saying I hate them for that, but it's a smart idea. But aside from that, we know that there is a revolving meta around League of Legends, and the primary aspect of a revolving meta is that it keeps the game fresh. There are new champions that are more powerful than other champions of old, and so you have to have an adaptation as a regular player or even as a pro player. Now, I won't get into the specifics of the difficulties of being a pro player in this type of weird cycle of constantly having your playstyle changed and fundamentally having your playstyle being revolutionized year upon year, so that you have to be adaptive. But what is incredibly important about these meta picks is that there are unique picks that can develop within the entire meta phase that are considered off meta picks. Now, this has a incredible advantage in the draft phase. First of all, like, let's just go towards the draft phase, and that if you have to ban something like Hjarnan's Heimerdinger, or you have to ban Huhi's Aurelian Soul, suddenly that gives you more power within the draft phase, because it's, first of all, something that the enemy team doesn't want to deal with because it's such an eccentric pick, and it changes completely the entire playstyle of not only the team that they're facing against, but also how they react as a team, because maybe they've never really played against a team that plays Aurelian Soul or Heimerdinger, right? Those two champions are champions that completely change the landscape of how the entire game is played out. So that's something that can be incredibly useful when it comes to the draft phase. Now, what the drawbacks are is that it hinders the players practicing meta picks, which are more powerful than the off-meta champions. So, as you know, players in solo queue, or professional players, they have to practice, and during this time, it's most efficient to try and practice the meta champions, because those are the best champions, right? And this is true because unless it's a hard counter, the stats don't make up for the unique pick itself. And that in itself is why mostly it's safe to try and practice the meta picks. That's why it's important for every pro player to then go towards the meta, because at the highest level, the skill discrepancy isn't that much. So in that sense, you have to rely upon the actual stats of the champion and which champion matchup is better than the other. And of course, this isn't true with the play-in stage that we just saw at Worlds 2018, because there is big gaps between teams within play-in stage. But once you go to the higher levels of pro play, say you go to the playoffs of NALCS or EULCS, like semifinals and things, meta picks become very important, and you can no longer outclass your opponent due to your simple mechanics within the entire game. So it becomes more of importance to practice these meta picks. And so if you're trying to practice a off meta pick, suddenly that's taking time away from what you could be practicing, which, is a objectively better champion because of the stats that Riot had given them because of the buffs inside the patches. So a few examples of this and off-meta champions is, say, Huhi's Aurelion Sol, right? This is one of the champions that is very eccentric because it changes the entire landscape of the game in that this is a heavy roam champion. You're able to push the waves without much sacrifice of mana, and then you're able to kind of go from there and decide what you want to do as a team. So this is incredibly important. But that forces his team to learn the champion and how it interacts with other lanes. All the other players within his team need to know how this champion functions within a team comp. And so it takes up valuable scrim time. You need to dedicate scrims to, okay, this is the Aurelion Sol scrim. We're going to chunk off 3 blocks of scrims just for this champion. Because if you play that champion within a normal setting and you say, okay, we are going to focus on these other aspects of what we want to play in terms of how we want to play the game, draft phase, and just overall general gameplay, then that's going to be skewed by the off-meta pick, which is Aurelion Sol, because it skews the game so hard. So it's not going to be a stable number to go off of. So it's very difficult to fit in a unique pick like that within scrim time, and you need to actually dedicate specific time to that pick because it's so off meta. Another instance is Froggen's Anivia. Now this is a little bit different because Froggen has been known as an Anivia player for a very long time. He's been playing for a very long time, so he picked this up during a time in which Anivia was actually pretty meta anyways, and then he just kind of carried it through throughout time. And he's had this pick since very far back, and it's not the same as someone learning a new niche pick now. If you're learning a new niche pick now and you haven't brought it out of solo queue, and when you're in the trenches or whatever within Challenger, then it becomes a problem, because not only are you trying to develop your skills with that champion itself, but the entire team is trying to create synergy with you. So it becomes a time waster if you aren't actually proficient at the champion. So this all boils down to the coach allowing these players to play this and practice the unique pick or not. Because at the end of the day, the coach should have the final say to say either you're shit at this champion, or we haven't practiced this champion enough within our entire team scrim, so therefore we aren't actually going to play it because no one else knows how to play around it. Yeah, sure, you know how to play the champion, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the team knows how to play around it. So you're forcing your teammates to inherently know about this pick when they don't. And so when it comes to team fight phase, you guys are kind of fucked because you don't really know what your teammate's going to do. That's the same instance in which you have a new player on the team and you get into a team fight and you don't know his team fight tendencies. You're going to make some misplays within that. And that's the same thing with a unique champion pick. You don't necessarily know the tendencies of that champion, which is in similarities to how a player would play a meta champion, a new player, right? So you have to decide as a team whether you want to focus this time to put into practice of this new meta champion or this off meta champion, or if you just want to practice the meta champions which have better stats objectively. And this is the debacle that a lot of teams end up going through. And I suggest if you are a very good team, it's probably not worth your roll of the dice to try and do a off meta pick, because you can already win with the meta picks, so there's no reason to do off meta. Now if you are at a very significant disadvantage against the enemy team because they are more skilled than you, say like you're an NA team versus Longzhu or IG or RNG or the past SKT, then yeah, sure, go for the off-meta picks. But to say that these players should be praised for their off-meta picks, I think is completely bullshit. Even if they do well in terms of their own lane phase and off-meta, it doesn't mean that their entire team knows how to play that. And so I don't think a lot of people realize this aspect when it comes to playing off-meta picks, because it's a double-edged sword, as I said, and there's a good side and a bad side to it, and it depends on how much time you want to invest in it. And also, it becomes this point in which if you want to invest this much time in it, this champion might become even less meta during the entire season. And so if you want to keep up with the current meta scheme, you should probably just practice your time towards meta picks instead of trying to pick some fucking cheese or something. So I have a really big problem with off meta picks. I don't think a lot of them are viable unless you're a old school player and you had played it in solo queue, or you played it in Challenger Series, whatever. That's fine. Or you played it in off season as well too. That's all right. But as we know with Riot's philosophy when it comes to patch changes and also champion remakes and reworks, is that your champion just may be completely reworked entirely. As we know with Urgot and Aatrox, if you were really good at those champions and suddenly you played it in pro play and then they rework it entirely, well, you aren't good at those champions anymore. So it's a very big double-edged sword. I think it's an incredibly big risk, and unless you are one of the bottom tier teams within one of your leagues or within Worlds, you should not play off meta picks, and it's just a detriment to your entire team's practice and how they want to play around you and your pick, because then it becomes all about you. And as we know, League of Legends is inherently a team game.